Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussion through the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year of 2021. And that brings me to the title, which has been designated Spine number 1064. This is a work that was released in 1974, and the filmmaker is Alan J. Pakula. It stars Warren Beatty, and the name of the film is The Parallax View. This is the film from 1974, and it stars, among others, Paula Prentice and William Daniels and Hume Cronyn and Warren Beatty as our main character, called Frady. And this is from the filmmaker Alan J. Pakula. This is, of course, the work, The Parallax View. I suppose if we were to try to focus on the plot essence of this film, we would focus on the aspect of the film that involves political assassination and these very violent acts that provide the foundation or the catalyst or the motivation, if you will, or the backdrop for the catalyst that causes our main character to embark on a type of mystery detective journey, if you will. And we thus follow him, the Warren Beatty character, as he tries to put together the clues, as he tries to figure out exactly what is going on in this type of landscape that we are, as viewers, confronted with. And ultimately, we are faced with the various challenges and cold landscapes and dilemmas and very chilling, confrontational types of information that lead us further down the paths to the ultimate conclusion, that is the parallax view. And so I think in those terms, what we have is a film that is a whole host or myriad of things. For example, it is a film that is about a type of journey that is a mystery thriller. So we have at the center of this a journalist who is also acting as a type of detective. We follow him, or we accompany him on his detective journey, trying to put the pieces together, trying to find the clues, as it were, to solve the mystery of the parallax view. So it is a type of detective mystery in that respect, I think. It is also a type of murder mystery in order to try to find out who or what could be responsible or behind the various violent acts that are committed. So it has that angle to it as well. It is also a very taut and quite cold and deliberate and incredibly chilling political thriller, or perhaps a politically based thriller. And I use this phrase because it seems to be borrowing or relying upon elements of the political landscape. It also is made in the early 1970s, and so this seems to be a film that is touching upon or using as some kind of contextual backdrop the recent historical events of the United States from the late 60s on into the early 1970s, including the assassination of a number of public figures. And so this film seems to be using or relying upon or perhaps touching upon those aspects of recent historical events in order to create this story that seems to be very close to that type of political-based thriller. So we have that angle that is supporting, I think, the overall thrust of this film going forward. Connected with that, we have the examination or introspection, or a type of deliberate working of certain themes and conditions and tones that are relevant to a depiction of Americana. This is very much a film about American culture, American life, especially during this period of the 1970s. And as I say, it does touch upon certain historical beats or pulses that would be very familiar to audiences of the time. And so it has that kind of connective tissue, if you will, with the consciousness of recent American historical events, but also in terms of the way things are shot, the way that certain landmarks or pieces of architecture are being depicted, and the way that various scenes are carried out. There is this idea of the film being a depiction of a slice of life Americana with the characteristics and visual stylistic flares and the building architectures and the people and the dress and the atmosphere and the type of elements of culture, 4th of July, Space Needle, barroom brawls, fishing, the use of cars and vehicular types of movement. And so on and so forth, and also the idea of the political rally and the speech and the band playing these types of tunes, as it were, that is supposed to evoke a sense of pride, a type of nationalistic sort of pride or celebration, if you will. And so these, I think, are elements that are bringing together a sense of a discussion or dissection, or even a working through the concepts of Americana as depicted through cinema and through Alan J. Pakula's camera. And so we have this type of examination. Again, I should point out that this examination is, of course, closely linked with how this film is trying to deal with, in this landscape, in the cinematic landscape, to trying to deal with or touch upon elements or tones of historical events that would have been very immediate to the contemporary audiences. And so we have those close connectivity types of feelings or atmospheres that are involved in this film. So it is a film that is about Americana, both the look and feel of it and the culture as well as the history. And enveloped among or within that particular framework of discussion and cinematic expression is, of course, the idea of unease, the idea of not being sure of what is going on. This is often described as being paranoia. And the idea of paranoia as being depicted in this film is one of, perhaps one is being subject of surveillance. We are being watched by people that are in the shadows. We are not sure who these people are. Maybe there is some kind of element of conspiracy that reaches the heights or echelons of power beyond, to an extent that is beyond our comprehension. And perhaps there is this idea of our lives being in danger because of the state of paranoia, because of the state of surveillance, and because of this state of violent political related acts that are at the root or that are at the center or focus of this particular investigation that is at the heart and center of the plot of this film, the parallax view. And so these feelings or these atmospheric tones of paranoia, of suspense, of a type of mystery, and of a type of overwhelming sense of conspiracy. These also are being, I think, very deftly and very skillfully tied into this type of examination of Americana and of history and of recent history. And when we have the combination of these elements, the paranoia, history, and Americana, the culture as depicted through cinema, when we have a combination of these, I think what results in that is a really deep-rooted discussion of the depths of the unknown and the fear that is involved in that, the feeling of being out of control, and the feeling of being watched, and the feeling of not necessarily being wholly protected. And in fact, quite the opposite could be the case. Perhaps we are not as protected as we might otherwise assume. And when we make that realization, anything is possible. And if anything is possible, then that is a very frightening proposition indeed. There is also, I think, enveloped in this a inherent discussion about the nature of storytelling and myth. After all, when we have a film that arguably is dissecting or otherwise holding a discussion about American culture, Americana, and political thriller, and also recent American history, and also paranoia. When we have this discussion, we also have, I think, embedded in that the notion of myth and storytelling. And I think this idea of myth and storytelling is very key to this work, the Parallax View, especially when we consider the inherent nature of conspiracy, the idea of conspiracy theory. What really happened? Is the official story of what happened really what happened? Or perhaps there is an underlying hidden truth behind the official story, thus leading to what is often termed to be, quote-unquote, the conspiracy theory. So these ideas of stories building upon stories, competing stories, what is true, what is fiction, and in fact, is the official story really what happened, or isn't it? And I think that is in parallel with the various discussions of American myth, American culture, the signifiers that suggest the various aspects of immediate and recent American culture as depicted in this film, the Parallax View. And so I think this therefore makes for very intriguing multi-avenued type of parallel discussion within the framework of the Parallax View. And it ultimately, in that framework, remains an incredibly taut, suspenseful action film that is very disturbing, and it also has a certain chilling sense of relevance even to the modern day, I would suggest, in the sense of the concept of surveillance and also the concept of privatization of surveillance, and what is the divide between public and private in the context of this particular realm, if you will, of discussion, which is ultimately about the protection of the individual and the ways in which the individuals may or may not be ultimately protected. And when we consider this particular question, I think the film poses some very disturbing questions indeed. And that is the root of its power, and that is the root of its, I think, fundamental ability to chill and to scare. And it remains in those ways and more utterly, utterly fascinating to this very day. This is the work from Alan J. Pakula, which is called The Parallax View. The Criterion Collection Blu-ray, which is what we have here, is purported to be based upon what is described as being a new 4K digital transfer. And so it looks and sounds excellent. And It's also wonderful to have this work on Blu-ray like this. And as some of you may know, this is a film from the 1970s, and it is often regarded as being part of what is often referred to as the Paranoia trilogy or cycle of films, Clute being one, the Parallax View being the other, and a later film also in the 70s called All the President's Men. So for those of you who know the Criterion collection, as of now, this particular video, there is also the film Clute. And so I think Clute and the Parallax View would make for some really compelling viewing indeed, if you are interested in that other work. But for now, let us focus on what this new Blu-ray from Criterion has to offer. And it has the film itself, which is, as I was trying to suggest before, utterly fascinating and really disturbing and quite an effective chiller of a film. But that is not all, because we have, as per Criterion's great custom, we have a number of supplements that help to further elaborate and illuminate upon the various workings and thematic discussions that are, I think, at the heart of this film. So first up is a introduction from filmmaker and all-around genius Alex Cox, and this is from 2020, approximately 15 minutes. And here we have a one-on-one discussion of Alex Cox and his appreciation for the film, The Parallax View. He brings up in this conversation a lot of really key points, incredibly key points. For example, he really brings home the concept of conspiracy. What is conspiracy? What is the definition of conspiracy, at least under, say, general principles of law? And the idea behind conspiracy is that, at least defined under general principles of law, it would be two or more people who are essentially working together to commit a crime. And so this is the essence of what conspiracy is. But when we take this idea and we consider it in the context of recent history from the 1960s and 1970s, and also in the context of the story that is The Parallax View, it becomes this really frightening point of intersection of thematic discussion. And this is the brilliance of Alex Cox's comment here and elsewhere in his introduction, as this brings with it all of the baggage and all of the implication of recent historical events. Of course, the assassination of JFK and the assassination of RFK and others are some examples that Alex Cox mentions here. He's talking about the aspects of what is considered to be examinations into possible conspiracy theories involving these particular historical events. And he therefore speaks also of how this film, in its way of dealing with this story, which is a fiction, how this film is still touching upon these points of history, of recent history, in a way that creates a sense of frightening dynamism. And so, for example, he brings up little details about how certain setups in the film are, of course, on the one hand, fictionalized depictions of story events, but also there are little details within the framing, within the particular, say, use of people in the foreground and background. He makes mention, Alex Cox says, for example, about the polka dot dress, and also the way a certain action or a certain major event early on in the film is portrayed, and how that has its very chilling visual parallels, if you will, with the real life events involving the assassination of Robert Kennedy. And so the film is a fiction, but is also relying upon a type of inherent understanding, if you will, of these very traumatic events of history. And it does so in this by using little visual clues or other types of of inherent sort of visual activity, I think also helped along quite magnificently by the camera work of Gordon Willis. But this is, I think, the genius of Alex Cox's discussion here, which is that he is able to link or make the links in terms of cinema and history as portrayed in the parallax view. And he brings up also another line of conversation here about the way in which the concept of the political thriller assassination and conspiracy has been depicted in cinema elsewhere. For example, films he mentions like Executive Action or The Mattei Affair or The Conversation. And so but he also identifies the parallax view as being, on the one hand, in line with this type of cinema that emerged during this time, but also how it has this chilling place in terms of fact in fiction, and how it seems to be borrowing from recent historical events but trying to portray its story. But there are some chilling connections that are made along the way. And also he mentions a very interesting point about the concept of modern day privatization of surveillance, which is a point that I raised earlier. And I think Alex Cox brings this point up much better than I do. But he brings the point home very well about how the concept of the privatization of surveillance and of gathering of private information, of personal data, I think is also at the heart of the parallax view. And in that way, Alex Cox suggests that this is perhaps much more modern and much more relevant to the modern day, the day that we are living right now as at the time of this video. Through that way, Alex Cox is suggesting that this film is perhaps much more relevant than meets the eye. And once we have that realization, it becomes even more chilling. So for those reasons and others, I think the Alex Cox introduction is really genius, and he really lays the groundwork for some brilliant conversation points, and his details about various figures, say, that are related or relevant to, for example, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and other points of discussion that he brings up are really quite compelling. And so this is so worth checking out if you can, the Alex Cox introduction. But that's not all, because then we get a approximately 18-minute audio talk from Alan J. Pakula himself. And this is described as being from November of 1974, the AFI Harold Lloyd Master Seminar given by Alan J. Pakula. And this is audio only, but the Criterion collection has edited together a number of stills and images from the film. Also, I understand that they provide some intertitles to try to give some organization to this overall audio excerpt or audio seminar from Alan J. Pakula. So well done, Criterion, for putting it together and organizing the material, and for including this fascinating talk from Pakula himself. He talks about his background very briefly, how he entered the business, as it were. He talks about his experiences with the study of psychoanalysis, for example. He also talks about his work with various people before he became a director. I mean, he was still a member or working in the industry with people like Robert Mulligan. There's a really interesting story, for example, also about a screen test with Audrey Hepburn, so please check this out for that story. It's really fascinating. And then he talks about the films that he made in the 1970s in particular, Clute and The Parallax View being the examples that are brought up in this particular audio lecture or seminar. And with this, he brings us into a discussion of his filmmaking craft, how he works with actors, how he tries to use the camera in order to present a sense of the surreal, or the sense of the type of maybe pressure on the individual from society writ large. And another way to express that is the word paranoia. How the sense of paranoia, the sense of unease, the sense of maybe one is being watched, how this is expressed in visual terms, how the actor is framed within the camera frame itself, the idea of distancing, the idea of creating a sense of the grotesque or the horrible within a particular frame in order to augment or otherwise create contrasts with particular characters that are on display at that particular moment in time in the film. And so this is exemplified through some shots that are provided regarding Clute. And I think the conversation carries over quite nicely into the discussion of the parallax view, because the parallax view holds those traits of cinema, I think, very strongly in terms of the way in which the characters are portrayed within the camera, the way in which there is a sense of distancing that could be suggestive implicitly of a type of surveillance or being watched, this idea of the pressure on the individual from the society writ large, thus leading to an inherent sense of paranoia. And so this is, I think, a great conversation from Pakula himself as to how he tries to achieve this in the form of his cinema. He's also talking about the points that I was trying to raise earlier about the film being a working out of themes involving Americana. That's his word, Americana. The idea of dealing with the concept of exceptionalism in the context of American history. The idea of modernity, or the past and present. And he uses the concept or the image of the Space Needle and the totem. And so this is a very interesting way to describe how he is trying to deal with past and present in the context of the fabric of American history. The idea also, I think, exemplified quite nicely in the idea of the 4th of July celebration being held in present day. And so he is trying, Pakula does, he is trying to describe how this film for him is a working out of various themes involving Americana. And this leads to the idea of myth and storytelling and conspiracy, which is also at the heart of the work, the Parallax View. He's also talking about the importance of rehearsals and also location shooting and other aspects of his filmmaking craft. And so those and other details, I think, are great reason enough to check out this audio lecture from Pakula, again described as being from 1974. And to continue on with the supplements, we also get another talk from Pakula. This time it's a video interview of sorts, approximately 6 minutes, from 1995. And this is also described as being from the AFI Director Series. And so we have Pakula looking back on the film. He mentions, of course, that it was a film that came out of the period post-Vietnam War. It also emerged during the time of Watergate. And so I think that adds to the level of connections with recent American history, and also the sense of paranoia, and also the sense of some kind of larger force at work that seems to have its roots in some kind of political institution. And so I think those comments from Pakula here are very appropriate, and they add to yet a further, I think, enhancement, if you will, of an engagement with the film. He also makes some really great observations about how the film is portraying a sense of the surreal in this environment and the scenes that it's depicting. And it almost is like a depiction of this culture through the lens of Kafka. And I found that to be a very profound statement, because it suggests a film that perhaps is yet another way to tell this type of myth, but it's a nightmare type of myth. And it's a nightmare type of myth that has this sense of imbalance and unease and inextricable unexplainable type of fright and fear, and yes, dare I say it again, paranoia. And so his description of this film as a type of Kafkaesque nightmare, I think, is incredibly brilliant. So, he also mentions a little bit about the circumstances involved with regard to the making of this film. It had certain chaotic production details in terms of the Screenwriters Guild strike and the structure of the script during filming. And so, but he also describes the film as being one of the most satisfying that he has ever made. And so Pakula, in this 1995 video interview, you got to check it out if you haven't already. It is really brilliant. So this is the interview from 1995. That's not all, because we continue on with an interview described as being from 2004 with the American Society of Cinematography, and this is an interview with Gordon Willis. Now, what Criterion have done here also is that they have taken the interview, the core of the interview, but they have also added in or edited some clips or intertitles into this entire supplement, which, as I say, is primarily focused on this interview with Willis. This is called Figures in Space, the Cinematography of the Parallax View, and it is amazing. It is amazing. The cinematography of Gordon Willis is one of those, I think, iconic aspects of 1970s American cinema and also 20th century American cinema period. His contribution to the landscape of American cinema is immense, absolutely immense. And part of that legacy is the brilliant work that he did for the film The Parallax View. And here he provides some of his reasoning, his philosophy. He starts out with a brilliant concept about how it's his concern as a cinematographer to have some kind of distance between the image and the audience. And this is very suggestive and very consistent with the comments made by Pakula in the previous supplements about how this film is a type of surreal, almost Kafkaesque nightmare. And what that, I think, implies is that this is not necessarily meant to be portraying this story in a docudrama type of manner. This is not necessarily meant to give us scenes that evoke a sense of the documentary feel. Cinema verite. It's not quite in that direction. This is still a very stylized work. It has its tones and its balances between darkness and shadow, that's for sure. But there is also a sense of style. And there's a sense of, to borrow Gordon Willis's word, distance between the image and the audience. And so I think this is a very key concept. But at the same time, what is so skillful about this film is that while it creates this distance, it still manages to give us connections with reality, with history, with culture that create the sense of the chilling in what we are watching as it's unfolding. So this comment from Gordon Willis, I think, is so profound, and it really goes at the heart of his philosophy, not just with this film, but also with the other films that he is very famous for. He also talks a little bit about the decisions involving anamorphic shooting and the presentation of the image. And he's also very honest, too, about how he views the film now, or when he gave the interview in 2004. He is very, very, almost brutally honest about how he thought some aspects he was very successful in, but there may be other aspects that maybe he could have done, in his words, maybe a better job. He is, I think, critical of the film in some aspects, but also very praiseworthy of the film in others. So this is a very refreshing, honest take by Gordon Willis about the Parallax View. He also gets into some very interesting personal details about how he met Alan J. Pakula and their working relationship, and what he perceives Alan J. Pakula to be as an artist, as a cinematic force, if you will, as a filmmaker, and working with him, and how their working relationship led to these various films like The Parallax View. So this is another great one to watch. Again, the interview with Gordon Willis. This is approximately 18 minutes. And then continuing on, we have a one-on-one interview with John Boorstin from 2020, which is called Pulling Focus, Constructing the Parallax View. And John Boorstin was an assistant, and so he was present in terms of being on set, working with Pakula, working on the crew, working in the crew, working in the production of the film itself. So he brings to this conversation a lot of extraordinary detail. First of all, he does refer to the fact that the production had a lot of elements of the chaotic. He does refer to the fact that maybe the script or the certain story elements weren't necessarily decided early on, so there is this element of the unknown in terms of production. So he also talks about the shooting style of Gordon Willis. He also talks about the very famous or infamous aspects of the film involving a personality test and his involvement in the creation of this for purposes of the film. And he's also talking about a very famous sequence in this film involving a film within a film and how that is used or employed within the context of the story and this its investigation that the Warren Beatty character is undergoing. And so this film aspect, I should mention that this film aspect was also, or film within a film, was also touched upon by Pakula in his 1974 audio lecture that's also included here. So you can get a real sense of the purpose and meaning and philosophy behind the creation of this particular film within a film. It's one of the most spectacular moments of this film, which is filled with so many spectacular moments, by the way, but that's one of them. And it creates this indelible sense of what the parallax view is and the real heart of the conspiracy, as it were. And here, to return to the discussion with John Boorstin, he makes reference to, for example, another film that had a similar type of sequence in it by Stanley Kubrick called A Clockwork Orange. But John Boorstin, I think, uses that comparison in order to further illustrate the meaning and purpose behind some of the editing choices and some of the presentation choices and the content choices that were involved with this particular film within a film. So for that and other reasons, this is another great supplement to check out. This is approximately 15 minutes. Then to return to the release itself, we have this really incredible design. It's simple and effective, incredibly effective. And even the design itself, I think, is very much implicating a type of discourse or discussion that could be had regarding this film. I mentioned earlier about concepts of privatization, and inherent in that word choice is the notion of to what extent, if at all, public institutions or certain pockets of public institution might be involved with the particular events that are unfolding in the parallax view. That is one of the great mysteries of the film. And it is clear and it is not clear, if that makes any sense, because there is this fragmentation or sense of mystery and the unknown, which leads to further aspects of the paranoia that is often mentioned with this work. But I think this artwork, lays the foundation for that possibility, if you will, in a very subtle yet well-delivered visual clue. With regard to this particular presentation by Criterion. So that's the artwork or design. Adam Maida is credited as being designer here, according to the booklet. So this is a really great, very effective presentation or cover art design. And I should say also, I've taken out the book here, and this is a very thick, robust book. It's the stapled kind, and I love that. And I think this is very chilling. This is very frightening. And this motif is also relevant to the film within the film that I was referring to earlier. And then the back is this little conceit of a a personality test, which is also very much inherently important with the plot. And so this is figuring into certain plot elements of this. And this is a great booklet because it has, among other things, it has an essay called Dark Towers by Nathan Heller. And this essay it's bold and it's so well written, and it goes into various plot elements, but it also talks about the Pakula approach, and it also talks about the significance of this in the context of the recent history and the fabric of American culture that it's depicting. So it's another brilliant essay from the Criterion collection presentation. So please check this out if you can, called Dark Towers. But that's not all, because we also have an interview with Alan J. Pakula, and this is described as being originally published in September 1974 issue of Filmmakers Newsletter and the interview is conducted by Andrew C. Bobrow. This is great. This is really great because we have Alan J. Pakula again. We got a lot of his words directly in a number of supplements that are included. And here we have a consistent conversation about the film and his working methods and his career, and how this film fits into the fabric of Pakula's career at the time of this interview, again, in 1974. And this is so awesome. This is really awesome to have. We have the Pakula, the lecture from 74, and then we have the 1995 interview here, and then we have this written interview, also from 74. So you can get a lot of what Pakula is trying to do with his filmmaking art and craft, and also you can get a lot of what his intent was regarding many aspects of the parallax view, as well as many other insightful comments. I'm so glad this is included, and it's very long too. I'm glad it's an interview of some considerable length, especially in the context of these Criterion inserts. So well done, Criterion, for being able to include this as well. And then the booklet is rounded out by the various information about the cast and crew, and then the Criterion release itself. I should also point out that this booklet doesn't have necessarily pictures in it per se, but it does carry on this motif of the test, and also of various images that are suggestive of the fragmentary nature of the discourse on American culture and paranoia. So I like this very much. This almost feels like its own little piece of cinematic memorabilia as created by the Criterion collection. So well done, Criterion, for creating this overall environment that is consistent with the film The Parallax View, all the way down to the insert. So well done, Criterion, for that. And so that is the release by Criterion of The Parallax View. Now, it would have been really nice, for example, if we could have gotten, say, more information about Pakula or this film, or maybe a supplement here and there. Maybe there could have been a supplement focusing on the so-called Paranoia trilogy from Pakula. Maybe there could have been a commentary track. There isn't one, unfortunately. It would have been great if we could have gotten one, of course. But with all those comments aside, I think what we are getting is a lovely package of information presented from Pakula himself, both in written form and also in audio form and visual form in the form of the supplements. And also, we get a great talk from Gordon Willis, who is a key creative force behind this film and other films of the era. And also we get the wonderful talk from Alex Cox, as I mentioned. And then ultimately we get the film. We get the film, The Parallax View, and I can't stress enough just how amazing and how bold and how dynamic, and yes, how scary and how chilling this film is. This is a wonderful addition to the Criterion collection, and I can recommend it wholeheartedly. This is the film from Alan J. Pakula from 1974, The Parallax View. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.